Good morning.
Good
And
morning.
how are you today? So, usually we would have Julia sitting beside me. She is looking a little bit different today. And Julia has now become Mateo. so,
Hi.
Mate- so, Mateo is a third year political science student at the University of Ottawa, and he's a member of our secret advisory board. So, Mateo is joining me today as we ask questions of our candidates. And Julia is here. She's running the show from the back end, but we can't see her today. So we've been having a notice up saying that there's going to be three candidates on. Unfortunately, we got a message from Mario Leclerc on Saturday saying that he has a scheduling conflict, so he won't be able to join us. All the candidates were invited. Unfortunately, Eric Duncan wasn't able to join us either. So we're having a friendly chat today with Sarah Good, who's representing the Liberals, and also Gordon Kubinak, the Green
Hi
Party
there.
member. So I like to say it's going to be a friendly chat. It's not a debate. I know you've had lots of those already, so this is going to be a lot easier for you. So my we're gonna have the candidates introduce themselves. So let's start with Sarah, ladies first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Sarah.
Sure. So I apologize. I'm making my coffee right now. It's been a wild few weeks there going through the campaign trail. So good to see you, Melissa and Mateo. Thank you so much for having us on. I think most of you know me as a city councilor here in Cornwall. I've been on council since 2022, and I have been absolutely loving that position. And now I'm looking to take my politics to a step further and make an impact on the national stage representing SDGs. So I work mostly in the nonprofit sector in health and social services. That's where most of my professional career has been. My degree was in geography from Carleton, and I have lived in Cornwall for many, many years. My family goes back here for generations, but I actually grew up in Lancaster and Green Valley, so I'm a South Glengarry girl as a kid, and now I'm a city girl in Cornwall, I suppose you could say. Yeah, I'm a mom of two kids. I have a 4-year-old son and a 10-year-old stepdaughter, and I really love to be active in the community. I'm passionate about making positive change and about environmental issues and social issues and the like. And I think that I can bring a really strong voice to the community. So thanks for having me.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. Actually, I've been watching the debates. I don't think I could do what you guys are doing, standing up there. You're doing a great job. And tell us a little bit about yourself, Gordon.
Hi there. My name's Gord Kubinek. I was born in Montreal. I met my wife while I was studying at McGill. I got married in Montreal, worked in the Eastern Townships as a high school physics teacher for several years. So I'm in Quebec a lot. I now live near Kemptville. I was first educated as a chemical engineer, first at Queen's, and then I did graduate school in Montreal. My first job was at a pulp and paper mill in British Columbia, and that mill suffered the same fate as the mill in Cornwall. It no longer exists. It was very strange to see it this summer. I visited. It's on the Sunshine Coast. I visited and saw this multi-billion-dollar complex. It was a massive mill, gone, shut down. It was just
Hmm.
really hit me in the gut. So the feeling of what happened to Cornwall and many other cities along the St. Lawrence really it hit home. Like when that, and so I get that, and a lot of that actually goes back to the original free trade agreement that rejigged a lot of trading patterns and industrial patterns. It helped some businesses and hurt other businesses. Basically, hurt smaller businesses and helped big business. So it was a pro big business deal. Um, I'm with the Greens now because I got very ill from a virus which almost killed me 20 years ago,
Hmm.
and I had been with the Reform Party before. So this sort of I'm kind of fiscally and fiscally conservative and sort of into this personal responsibility, but being sick expanded my window to realize that, we all have a bad day and we all need each other's help. So there's this looking at responsibility in the community sense rather than just the individual sense, which I got from that. And because of that, I then changed over to the Greens. Most importantly of all, I started reading. I had several years to read what's going on, because when you almost kick the bucket, you feel very mortal, and you
Yeah.
wonder about, what will be my legacy? What will people remember me for? My kids and friends. And I looked around and said, the issue is our trashing of the planet. And it's not just trashing the planet. When we trash the planet, we trash each other. So if you look at the fact that since we've had ongoing environmental catastrophes, we've also had more social catastrophes and things like the opioid crisis, the homelessness crisis, the significant increase in kids with autism and things like that, crime, they actually link together. So the way we treat whoever doesn't have power, which in this case happens to be Mother Nature, is how we ended up treating each other, the people in our society who have no power. So they're totally linked. So all the social policy questions for me go back to that linkage, and that's why I'm with the Greens.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it appears we have our first question in. I want to say before we start, thank you both for being here, for supporting local media. We at The Seeker really appreciate it. But our first question here is from Phyllis Will, who asks, will your party commit federal funding to assist the city in getting a homeless shelter in Cornwall, whether it's renovating an existing empty building or building something new? And because we started with Sarah for the introduction, we'll start with Gordon here.
Yes, we would make sure it happens, but more than that, our emphasis, because for me, now you got to understand, when I say green, the Greens candidates have quite a lot of leeway in terms of that, as long as we give an answer within the green value, paradigm. I think the homeless situation is beyond horrible and unacceptable, and a sign that we've really blown it in a very deep way. And the problems go back to the 90s when the feds got out of public housing completely and stopped building cooperative housing. So I would put the federal government back where it needs to be, as a ongoing, always involved with affordable housing in a significant way. It turns out, because I'm a Green Party member, and we'll always look at Green parties around the world, and I always look at what other countries are doing. Every other G7 country has the federal government involved in a big way in public housing, except the Americans, of course. We make the mistake of comparing ourselves to Americans. Terrible idea. Look at other countries. And so the feds need to be in their affordable housing big time, all the time. So I would say homeless shelter is simply the tip of the disastrous iceberg. Where will that come from? That's always the question. Where's the money going to come from? Right now, it depends upon who you talk with. There are $5 to $10 billion every year going towards to increase the profits of the oil companies in the tar sands in Alberta. The Liberals had promised to eliminate that subsidy, which didn't happen, unfortunately. And I know Sarah was very good last night about being apologetic for that. So thank you for that, Sarah. But we would actually do it and say, we've got the money. We just direct it to the people, instead of the people who have the money already, to the people who don't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Phyllis, and thanks for having me here. Sorry, I had the beautiful idea that I would sit in my front porch on this absolutely gorgeous day, probably the warmest day we've had so far this year, and then my Wi-Fi connection kicked out, so that didn't quite work out as I thought it would. But I think one of the priorities, certainly of our Liberal government, and I think this is something that has become best practice as we look at housing and affordable housing, is a housing first model, where there's not a requirement, that you get clean, quote unquote, before getting housing. That housing is something that will help people be successful in all of these other areas of life. So the announcement that was made, I think it's now a couple weeks ago, because it's just like I said earlier, the campaign trail is absolutely a blur. But to invest in housing in a way that Gordon was referencing earlier, in actually having the federal government building housing in a way that we have not done since post World War II. And so that announcement's been made. We're looking at, a huge injection of public funds into building housing. And that's through public-private partnerships, of course, because the government can't do it on their own. But I think there is a place for housing, for homelessness shelters. There's also there are concerns with how that actually impacts people. A lot of people get their things stolen. It's not necessarily dignified. They're having to move their stuff out at night, in the morning when they leave, and then come back in at night. People are waiting in lines trying to find a bed. So there's some hostility that comes with that, because it's kind of like, you're fighting to try and get in first and get your spot. What I think is important is looking at the research and looking at what those best practices are. And if we can help people get into dignified housing where they can lock their door at the end of the night, they have a place for their things, and they can work to reintegrate into society, I think that is the direction that we need to be taking. A homelessness shelter, in my estimation, is a Band-Aid solution. It doesn't actually address people's core needs for reliable, affordable, and safe housing. So, my thought is, I think that requires more discussion. I think there's certainly room for that to happen, and it could happen, but I don't want to start making promises that I can't keep around this. I know we're injecting into housing, and that housing first solution has been part of that conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Now, for the future questions we will ask, I guess we should have put this disclaimer at the beginning, that the candidates keep the answers to the sweet spot around a minute and 30 seconds. We have a lot of questions to get to. Just putting that disclaimer out for future questions.
Good. That we didn't know that.
So, yeah. We should have put that disclaimer forth at the beginning.
Sorry, because we do blab on if we don't tell us to shut up. So
it's no problem.
Good. Well done. Thank you very much.
So the next question that's come in is from Brendan Norman. What is your party going to do if we ever face a pandemic again? What do they plan to do differently? And be specific, please.
I'm assuming this is going to me first this time, because we're switching order.
Let's go with Sarah.
Loaded question, Brenda. What's the pandemic? I think honestly, when we went through the COVID pandemic, it was not something that we were prepared for. And that another pandemic, we don't know what it's going to look like. Is it something that spreads rapidly and is deadly? Is it something that just causes us to be sick for a little while, but most people survive it? I think that, unfortunately, the reality is that we want to balance public health and people's personal rights. So, I don't have a clear answer with details, because we don't know the nature of such a pandemic. And I don't want to give a wishy-washy answer, but I think that vaccines are important for public health, and that was an important move in order to protect our population from seeing a massive loss of population. But at the same time, when you're in a crisis and you're dealing with it, we always make mistakes. And that's why you go and you do a post-mortem and you say, what could we have done better after? I cannot unilaterally make that decision.
Thank you. And Gordon.
Right. It's too bad. Sarah and I are going to sort of agree too much. So I really appreciate
I know.
the audience. I'm going to put a little bit of a tweak upon it. I teach a lot of homeschoolers, and they generally don't vaccinate, and they're great people. I also had quite a few friends who were at the trucking convoy downtown, and they actually were great people too. I also had a friend who worked for the city of Ottawa from home. She was working from home. She didn't vaccinate, and the city managed to fire her. And they basically... there was no public health risk at all. So I was afraid that the underlying problem really was the government response that really vilified the people who were like that. And I think that's the biggest long-term damage that was done to the the visceral dislike that is out there because people were demonized, and that's not on. So whatever we do, we can't demonize people. I'm actually a big fan of what Sweden did, and they didn't do all the things we did. They tried to focus on educating the population. They did have vaccines available, but they didn't demonize the population. It didn't not allow me to walk in the public parks and shut down the provincial parks like we did here. They were not paranoid. Okay, so I don't want a paranoid response. So for me, the underlying thing is how do we keep our social, that we're all in the same team. We all are together. There is a bird flu coming up, say, right now, when Sarah said, depends what's coming up. Well, the one that is on the radar and has been for years is the bird flu. You may have heard that they've slaughtered over 100 million chickens in the US, and that's why they have a shortage of eggs. Eggs have doubled in price. The odds of that transferring to the human genome are increasing by the minute. So if I was to bet, we would get the bird flu, which is much, much more deadly than COVID because, quite frankly, COVID wasn't that deadly. Okay, now we didn't know that at the beginning, but
Thank you, Gordon. It's time.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Good.
Okay, and you're going to get the chance to talk right again for our next question first, which is, will your party make sure that federal health programs support the creation of more clinics in smaller cities like Cornwall? And we'll start with you, Gordon.
Okay, so in the Green Party policy, there is one bit that's always been consistent, that our public health is focused on prevention. And even though health in general is provincial, public health is actually federal jurisdiction. So anything which is public health, the feds can work with the provinces in this case to do clinics, but especially if it's public health, that is within our domain. So the idea is to have more public clinics in small places, but more than that, to have those clinics focused on prevention so that it's not just constantly crisis. So I'm going to flip back to COVID. It turns out that people who were most at dangers were either had diabetes, obesity, or were in old age homes where the death rate was over 20%. And by the way, the death rate in private homes was 5 or 6 times more than the public facilities. So we need to protect public safety. We need things like more public old age homes where people are safer, and also prevention at the clinic level to educate people so that they're healthy and stronger when diseases come.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's important to recognize that, having people attached to primary care is important so that they're not left just floundering when they have health concerns. Research shows that team-based care and community health centers provide the best quality of care for people. And that is no slight against primary care physicians who operate their own private practices. They do very well. But when people have access to allied health like physiotherapy, nutrition, mental health, they have better access to that overall care, which I think, like Gordon was saying, that's part of that preventative health, is being able to have access to well-rounded healthcare services. So again, most of this is provincial jurisdiction and how they decide to disseminate that funding, I should say. Recognizing that there is a discrepancy in the salaries between community health centers and hospitals, for instance, that health professionals are making, and making sure that those salaries are equitable, I think would be very valuable. In addition to opening up the billing codes to make sure that telehealth is something that can always be billed for equitably in the same way that an in-person doctor's visit can be.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Next question. This question is coming from Kelsey Catherine Young, and she says, my family relies on the daycare subsidies in order for my husband and I to both maintain our professional careers. Our current MP voted against the funding of this program. Will you and your party maintain this funding for families?
That's to me?
Oh, yes, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Kelsey. I am actually in the same boat as you. My son will be starting school in September. And for us, this has been something that has actually allowed both my husband and I to participate meaningfully in the workforce without that or reducing that burden of having to pay for childcare in order to, free up our time and allow us to contribute meaningfully to the workforce. This is something that our Liberal government will continue to support because we understand the importance of making sure that parents of young children can still meaningfully participate in the workforce if that's what they choose to do.
She did have another little section saying, what else will you do for young families?
Yeah, there's our Liberal government is looking to increase the Canadian child tax benefit so that there's an additional subsidy that comes through. We know that inflation has hit everyone hard. And unfortunately, the cost of things like diapers and clothing and food in general, everything has skyrocketed. So when you're trying to feed a family with a bunch of hungry kids, that is definitely something that we need to consider, that puts an additional burden. And we're building the workforce for the future. People don't recognize that being a caregiver and being a parent is work, and that actually does contribute to the economy, even if it's unpaid labor.
Thanks, Sarah. And Gordon?
Daycare, I'm just thinking about why our MP would have against it. There is unfortunately reasons for it, in that there is some research showing, like a lot of research showing, that it's much better for the long-term health and mental health of the child to be at home until about 3. Secondly, there's also a lot of research saying that if you do have daycare, which is a good thing in the right time in the right place, I'm supportive of it, but you need to have the same person so that the child bonds with the face, because the children's brain are bonding to the face. And if you just have rotating people, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty that goes into there. So you're basically wiring the child. This has to do with early childhood education. So I don't think it's a question of pro daycare or anti daycare. There's good daycare, and there's, for the long-term health of the child, not good daycare. The question tends to be always focused around money and the economy. The question should be, what is in the best interest of the child's long-term physical and mental health? And we support the families to do that. And so we would be asking that kind of question. That's the first part of that. So I'm pro daycare if it's done right. The best thing, of course, is to have families being able to afford it. Cost of living is going up. A lot of that has to do with the big picture. Just costs are going. By the way, food is going to keep going up because of global population growth and climate disruption. Housing we can deal with. We simply have fallen into what's called the third world trap, where we have more people than our ability to provide services. So we need to change that and work with the communities to build housing. Once again, it's linked to the first question. Housing is the number one cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Our next question is from Jacquie Milner, and she asks, Canada has a large deficit. What are your plans to address paying down this debt while dealing with the many challenges our country has? And we'll start with Gordon.
The debt has increased significantly under the last few years of the Trudeau regime. I'm going to have to agree with the Conservatives on that. However, if you compare us to lots of other countries, they're in much worse shape. So I don't think we should be freaking out about this. About that, we actually have a very strong economy. It's over $2 trillion and growing, and we're the 9th largest in the world. But the debt is a long-term burden. So I don't want to freak out about it, but it's an issue to get with. I would say that what we have to do is, instead of, like, I'm with the Reform Party, so I have a little bit of this fiscal conservative stuff in my blood. I'm all for spending money which builds permanent infrastructure and productivity increases in the economy. Those investments need to continue. For example, that would mean having a cross-country electrical grid, which we can control. But I would not support just slash and burning like's happening in the United States. I would definitely not support that slash and burn. So we'd have to go through program by program. Is the government bureaucracy too big right now? Yes, I would think it would need to be decreased. But what we need to make sure we don't do is throw out the baby with the bathwater. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater is important, and recognizing that, again, where we stand in relation to other countries in terms of our deficit, we're not, we don't have the highest level of debt of any other country. That's not to say it's not important to chip away at it. And if there's any leader who I trust to be able to be wise in their economic decisions, it's somebody with a PhD in economics who was also the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. So I feel like we're in very, very good hands in terms of our leadership to be able to tackle that problem. We also need to look at the overall budget. There's operational expenses and there's investment expenses. And if we're going to be looking at our investment expenses, ensuring that what we are investing in is going to actually help boost our economy and feed back into that productivity. Because, just paying off debt, if we could just pay off our mortgages all at once, that's fine. But there's smart debt. Well, there's good debt and bad debt. And so you can't lump it all together. I think it's really important to recognize what those long-term consequences are of some of that debt and how that feeds back into our ability to be productive as an economy, and not just productive, but healthy and well as a people.
Thank you, Sarah.
Next question.
Yep. I can go. I guess I double up on question. This is my question.
Yep.
And it reads, the large parties in Canada regularly get elected as supermajorities without receiving over 50% of the vote, while smarter parties often get left unrepresented entirely, despite receiving hundreds of thousands to over 1 million votes in federal elections. Critics of this have proposed electoral reforms such as a ranked choice system. If elected, does your party have any plan to reform voting in Canadian federal elections? And we'll start with you, Sarah.
Thank you for that, Mateo. And you know what? I have to say that was one of the promises that was made by the previous Liberal government that I was probably most disappointed wasn't followed through on. Because, we talk about voter engagement and splitting the vote. I really do believe that electoral reform will help reinvigorate people's feeling that their vote matters, and will help people become re-engaged in the electoral process itself. You mentioned ranked ballots, which I actually, you can do proportional, you can do ranked, you can do kind of a mix of both. There's many different variations to this. But I think that it actually also provides for a landscape that is slightly more positive. If you're doing a ranked ballot, you're less likely to throw mud at somebody because, you think, well, if I can't be the first choice, I'd rather at least be the second choice. And, like Gordon and I are agreeing on lots of things. And I think it's wonderful when we have debates that we get to, have these civil debates and agree on a lot of things together. But absolutely, we haven't received a firm announcement from Prime Minister Carney in regards to following through on electoral reform. But I would hope that over the course of the next 4 years, that this would be a priority that people across all parties will continue to push for the reasons stated.
And thank you. And Gordon.
As you well know, that sounds like a loaded question, to support the Green Party agenda. And I'll just give you a visceral example of this. I was at a debate with Sarah yesterday in Alexandria, and I had about 10 people come to me after the debate and said, I would vote for you, but I feel like I'm wasting my vote, and that's just a terrible thing. And that's one of the big drivers that drives people to not participate in politics. They don't feel like their voices are being heard. You squelch dynamic change. Around the world, the Green parties exist as a junior partner whenever there is some form of rank ballot or a proportional representation, all the time, no exceptions. We're a voice. We are, for those of you who read children's stories, we are the Lorax. We speak for those who have no voice. That's our job, right? And we do it very well. We have no intention really of being in power like Sarah does, because if we did that, we would just be like the Liberals. So we want to maintain that kind of alternative vision out there, but we need proportional representation. Ranked voting is a good thing. We can do it. The thing about the Liberals, and I really love Sarah, but the Liberals often say great things, but they don't follow through. To those conservative voters out there, if there would have been proportional representation, there would have been a conservative government the last 2 elections. So I don't understand why the conservatives are against this system.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question from Alex Gaetang. Would you support a target of reaching the OECD average for social housing in Canada, which would roughly double the current percentage of social housing in this country? So we started with Sarah last time, right, Mateo?
Yep.
I got listening to everything and I lost track. So we're going to start with Gordon this time.
Yeah, that's related to a previous question. Of course, the answer is yes. We have to be in that business. Sarah and I are going to agree on that. I would go much further than that. I spent a bunch of time in Singapore. Singapore is a very interesting country in that it's totally free market, totally free enterprise. They have virtually no unemployment. They are the richest country per capita in the world with absolutely no resources. And one of the things they do is they make sure that there is virtually no crime, virtually no unemployment, and they do that by having housing for everybody. Everybody goes into social housing. But what they do is put social housing is for everybody while they're building capital. So there isn't this line between the have and the have-nots. Is all of us together live in social housing, and then we build capital, and we have a forced savings like a pension, and then we have enough where you get booted out so you can stand on your own 2 feet. So it's like a philosophy, always the same thing. We need a collective us to get us to the point where we can stand on our own 2 feet so that I can be independent and have the self-respect. And that's the kind of thing I would be moving towards here in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Yeah. And, again, Gordon and I agree largely on many of these things. I think us working towards reaching those targets is very important. And we've seen, since the 90s and I guess during the Harper government, the selling off of publicly owned subsidized social housing. And so we've realized the impact that we've had with that. And yeah, we got a quick buck, but that wasn't something that in the long term has helped our population. So now we are talking about how we can begin to reinvest as a federal government in affordable housing to make sure that people have somewhere to live. We have such a beautiful country, and people come here and people live here, and then all of a sudden, their rent gets increased by double, or they can't get into the housing market anymore. And that's just not somewhere that you can thrive when you can't even get into the housing market. So I think we cannot rely on the free market alone to solve this problem. It's part of what has gotten us into the problem in the first place. And I think that we do need a re-injection of federal funding and federal investment into public and affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Melanie Ayot, which I can see here is one of the hot button issues in this election. And the question is, given the elimination of consumer carbon pricing, what replacement programs would your party implement to enable Canada to meet its GHG reduction commitments? Would you support the re-implementation of consumer carbon pricing? If not, in what ways would your proposed measures be more effective than consumer carbon pricing? And we'll start with Sarah.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for the question. So what the Liberal government has done is maintain the industrial carbon pricing so that we have a carbon tax on industrial emissions. However, we have eliminated both the consumer carbon tax as well as the consumer carbon rebate. So it's important to know, that's a double-edged sword there. A part of the mentality of this, one, there's a price on pollution. When you pollute, we have to do something with that pollution. It doesn't cost nothing for us to actually address the impacts of climate change. And so I do think that it's important that in some iteration that we maintain a price on pollution or a price on carbon, however you want to look at it, whether that is targeted specifically to industries. as well as incentivizing a transition to renewable energy sources so that we become less reliant on fossil fuels and so that we become more resilient and future ready. Part of this is not just what we emit, but how efficient are our homes? How efficient are our vehicles? If we can work on increasing the efficiency, then we become less reliant on those polluting forms of energy.
Thank you, Sarah. And Gordon?
I'm with the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, which is an environmental think tank, and we've been researching the environment and how do we keep our society sustainable since the 1960s. We're not a fan of the carbon tax, and it was because it was felt like people were being punished and they saw no significant alternative. So I do agree with Sarah that we need to maintain something so we can have tariffs with Europe. I'm not sure what that has to be, but there needs to be something, but not what we had. I'm glad it's gone. But what we need to do is encourage the price of alternative energy. I do have an electric car and I do have a heat pump, but I have the capital. And because I had the capital, I was able to look at the math. I'm an engineer. I did all the math, and it's actually cheaper for me to drive my electric car, and it's cheaper for me to heat my house with a heat pump. I'm in the country because it heats and cools, but people need access to capital, and they don't have it. The Bank of Canada has the power, and we have actually a very unique system where the federal government can use the power of the Bank of Canada to provide interest-free capital loans to the population to make this transition. And then they pay it back at zero interest, and then their costs actually go down. But we have to make it affordable for people. And without that, the whole thing is a waste of time because our emissions have actually kept on going up during the carbon tax era. The emissions not only went up, they accelerated. So that didn't work. Let's help people make things affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you. All right, we have the next question. Will your party put some pressure on the provinces to increase the Ontario Works, the OW rate? It's been over 6 years since OW got an increase. Let's start with Gordon.
Oh, that gets into federal provincial stuff. I can just tell you a story right now. I have a nephew who's looking for a job, and he mostly is finding jobs that are part-time and minimum wage. He can barely afford a room. When he was looking for work 10 years ago, he could afford an apartment and get minimum wage, but at least full-time. So it's obviously a travesty for him that he is now having to work partially in Ontario Work, so he can't find full-time work. It has to go increase. How do you put pressure on a government? I'm not familiar with the politics of that. That has to do with the whole idea of collaboration between the provinces and the provincial meetings. I think the feds can set an example by paying their workers what's called a living wage, which means in SDG, for any federal institution, the wage would be $21 an hour, and it would vary by region. So the feds have to set an example and work collaboratively. There are carrots and sticks that the feds have. The feds have the power of cash, right? And the provinces don't have the same amount of money we have. That was designed into the British North America Act. But you got with a separatist movement in Alberta like we had in Quebec. So we're trading on a minefield. But it's absolutely essential. It's super embarrassing. And I know people who are hurting right now because of it. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sarah.
Thanks for the question. The question is about OW, which is literally Ontario Works. So we know this because we live in Ontario and this is our province, but each province is administering these employment benefits and financial assistance differently. I believe that, that type of assistance is intended to be temporary. It isn't intended to be something that goes on forever. Unlike disability payments, which are something that more often than not, people are relying on throughout a long period of their life, or even potentially for the course of their life, depending on what kind of disability it is that they're under. So I think that when we need to look at the short term and the long term, the fact of the matter is cost of living has increased exponentially. And if we're going to be providing supports for people to get through these times, well, we need to be able to pay them enough that they're not putting themselves at risk in that period. So my focus would be more on increasing disability payments so that people who are on disability are not falling into the hole and unable to survive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from a reader, and it says, I understand our political parties and leaders do not necessarily agree on policy and solutions. However, I think it is vital that our parties and elected representatives show each other respect, no name calling, and most importantly, look for common ground between them so they can work together to serve us. Are you ready and willing to work with all elected to serve your constituents, our country? And we'll start with Sarah.
Thank you for the question. Absolutely, finding common ground is essential. I think our jobs are to bring forward the perspectives that we have, represent our ridings, and push each other to find better solutions through collaboration. I'm a big believer in collaboration. It's part of what I do in my work. It's part of what happens on council, not necessarily around the council table, but certainly behind the scenes. We push each other to be better. And when we have different perspectives, that shouldn't be something that causes disrespect. I'm not a believer in, quote, name calling and mudslinging. I do think it's important that we call out people for their behaviors and not shy away from saying, hey, when people show you who they are, believe them. That's a philosophy that I have had in my life. It's not to say that people can't change, but more often than not, when people show you what they are and what they're voting against, I think it's important that we call out the voting records of our elected officials. And again, people can change, but if we're not going to be addressing the ways that people have voted in the past and the impacts that's had on society, then we're not going to be able to meaningfully make change. But yes, respect and working together is important, 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And Gordon.
There's an idea out there in human behavior that the system drives the behavior. So all of us will do what is effective given the rules of the game. So here's a really simple example. Whining children. Okay, those of you who have kids, you know that kids whine. I asked my kids the other day, why didn't you whine when you grew up? And they said, well, because we knew it wouldn't work. So they stopped whining. The politicians do that because it wins them elections, because we have an adversarial system. The first past the post system rewards that kind of behavior. And so we get that behavior because they win elections. That's it. You want to change behavior because we all do what gets us what we want. Therefore, you have to change the system, which will drive different behavior. As we talked about before with the electoral reform system, when you had something like we talked about before, like ranked voting, you can't do that because you're not going to win. You're going to lose. And suddenly people are more polite because they're going to do what is going to get them to win the election. So this is linked to voting reform, to changing the system. Should the people who name call be tossed immediately? Absolutely. Should the people who basically say things that are completely not true be called out on that and be tossed, with no mercy? Absolutely. But that's not going to actually solve the problem. Those are all band-aids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
So next we have a question from Sebastian Warner. What are the 3 most important issues to you facing our SDG riding, and what is your plan to address them? So let's start with Gordon on this one.
We all know that the big elephant in the room is Donald Trump. So whether it's SDG or Nanaimo, British Columbia, that is the number one issue. And that is where we're going to be losing a lot of jobs. I mean, that's the sad truth of that. Now, beware that in the US, they're also suffering. So we can't just sort of do a hate on for our American friends because they're suffering, because I have friends down there and they're suffering worse in many ways. But the reality is we got ourselves into this situation where we're overly vulnerable to 80% plus of our trade going south of the border. We need to reestablish east-west trade, which was the foundation of Canada. We built the railroad east-west against economic gravity. We need to do that again. That means tearing down interprovincial trade, and that means also having more emphasis on food security. It's a very rural riding. I drove across 43 yesterday from Alexandria to Kemptville, and I said, wow, this is gorgeous farmland. And so we have to focus on getting food security and emphasizing supply chains so that the farmers can be invigorated and make higher profit margins so they can reinvest that in the community. That would be working on soil depletion. So if I'm going to speak now to all the farmers out there in all the small towns, with the massive cost increases in the inputs to pesticides, fertilizers, and cost of heavy machineries, the farmers are getting squeezed more and more, which means they don't have money to spend in the community. So we need to work with the farming community to reverse that trend in the farming so that they can increase their profit margins and then respend it in the community so the money stays in SDG. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. And Sarah.
Thanks so much for the question, Sebastian. I think that, if I could choose only three, what Gordon brings up is an important point. We can't get away from the fact that the threats from the Trump administration are affecting our economy and affecting our sense of safety and well-being. So I think that, diversifying our trade and our economy is going to be important here in SDG to help ensure that people's livelihoods are protected. We have a huge agricultural sector here in SDG, and we want to ensure that those farmers who are producing the food that feeds our cities are protected. And not only that, we have many people in industries. I know Ross Video, down in Iroquois, they're going to be, facing some issues because of these tariffs. And so there's going to be many workers who are feeling this sense of vulnerability because of the fact that their industries are being heavily tariffed. And so the Liberal government is working to ensure that EI is more quickly accessible and that it will help soften the blow that's potentially going to come to these industries. We talked already about housing. That's a huge, huge issue in our community. We've seen encampments that we've never seen before the pandemic, not to say we never had homelessness, and definitely ensuring that we're bolstering our healthcare and making it so that those credentials are recognized across Canada.
Thank you.
We have a question from a reader who seems to be interested in the apolitical side of this all. And this reader asks, how do you unwind after a long day on the campaign trail? And we'll start with Sarah.
Immediately hit my pillow. No, it's been, I think it's been 3 weeks since the election was called. And the week before that was leading up to my kickoff rally. I'd say for the last 4 weeks, I've probably been putting in about 100-hour work weeks, probably more than I've ever worked in my life. And I joke, I'm running off of fumes and good vibes. I think, my family has been an incredible support. And oftentimes I'll come home and say, I just need to melt into my husband. And I'm very, very fortunate that I have that luxury of having a very, very supportive spouse. And my parents live across the street, so they're tagging in with babysitting and doing work here. There's not been a lot of unwinding time. There are 2 weeks left in this campaign. It is all hands on deck. We're working hard. I am not planning on resting until this is over. And so unwinding is going to be happening in about 2 weeks after the election. And I'm really hopeful that it'll be a celebratory unwind.
Awesome. And Gordon.
Behind that question, there's a really, it's loaded in terms of politics being a dark and unpleasant business that both people don't enjoy. I was very surprised yesterday in Alexandria when there were at least 400 people, and it was really positive. So the fact that we need to keep in a happy place is a big deal. I saw that with the candidates yesterday. I was really surprised what a happy place they were in, positive. I do it. I write kids stories. So I've written 10 kids books, and I do poetry. and I play with my grandchild, and it's really, really a big deal to not get dark. I quite frankly do this. I know I'm not going to win, but I do it because there are people out there whose voice needs to be heard. I call them the lunatic fringe. And by the way, these lunatics are the most lovely people you can possibly imagine. Lunatics that are positive and joyful. And that's why I'm there. I'm there to represent them and their voices. And I just enjoy it. I got to admit, I had fun yesterday. I mean, that was shocking because the audience was just such a wonderful audience. And so I actually, strangely enough, even though it's tough, and let's not kid ourselves, it's hard. I mean, putting yourself out there and not trying to put your foot in your mouth, because it's really easy to say one wrong thing and that's all that people remember. That's brutal. On the other hand, I do it because I enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here from Jane McLaren, which isn't put up. It's quite the long question. I will talk about the main point of it for the sake of brevity, but there's a lot of information and it's a well thought out question. So if you have time, look at the full question. It's very insightful.
Where is it?
But
Where do
the
we see
gist
it?
of it is, what will your party do? It's in the Facebook comments. The question is, what will your party do to help ensure the rights and independence of disabled people? And we'll start with Gordon.
Right. Okay. I want to get personal about this because politics is local and politics is personal. Really, politics is about us getting along. And so many years ago, I met a gentleman who lives down the road here, and he's highly disabled. He was working. He had his own business baking bread, and then he became disabled. And so I made it, he was a great guy. And I said, look, let's maintain a friendship with him. And so he doesn't become isolated. So I've worked with him because he's such a great guy to maintain that friendship. And that's, I think, made a significant difference in his life. He comes with me on my campaign visits. He'll be there at the Labor Council. And so what he talks about, and I just want to hear it from him, is that the amount of money that he gets is a joke. Like, it's beyond unbelievable. On the other hand, the fact that we have to go begging to the government for everything is also, quite frankly, also not affordable. I was disabled for many years because of a virus which gave me heart failure, and I had private disability insurance. So Sarah alluded to that, but I would not make it another government program because I think a lot of what's going on is we're shifting the burden of what the private sector should be doing, and they're reducing their costs by dumping it onto the government to do their. Disability insurance should be a cost that is equally shared by the employee and the employer, just like the pension plan, just like employment insurance, and mandatory for everybody all the time. And then when you have disability, which is going to happen to at least 25% of Canadians. So unfortunately, count on it. It's part of life, like rain. We need to do it. We need that first. For the feds right now are increasing the amount. So once again, I want to give kudos to the Liberals. They are increasing the disability payments by topping off what the province is doing, because he has to live on $100. So there are some good things, but we need deeper structural changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah.
And Gordon brings up a good point that there is a top up that's going to be administered. I believe it's effective in June. And I actually had the opportunity when we did our CBC radio interview on Friday to speak with Gordon's friend about this very topic and about the $200 a month increase that will be available to people, to adults living with disability. I think it's important to recognize too that some people are born with disabilities. And so putting it on an employer might not necessarily be feasible for those people. And so it's important that we recognize that disabilities come in all shapes and forms, and that people can meaningfully contribute into society. I am a believer that, when we provide a subsidy for adults living with disability and children, which would inevitably go to their parents, that we're not clawing back when those people start to contribute to the workforce, at least not in a way that disincentivizes them to contribute to the workforce. So I think people have so many skills that they bring forward. And unfortunately, sometimes we shackle people with disabilities to say, well, if you want to continue to receive your disability payment, then you're not going to be able to meaningfully contribute to the workforce in the way that you are able to. So I think allowing those who want to contribute without having substantial clawbacks is important. And supporting them, because sometimes disabilities fluctuate and you might have a good day, you might have a bad day, but that doesn't mean that you can't contribute to the fabric of our society.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, so we have a interesting question. What's the most surprising conversation you've had while campaigning? So we're going to start with Gordon on that one.
Okay. I was having an interview with a local newspaper, and I was mentioning the fact that there's a 3% per year increase in colorectal cancer among young Canadians. And I was getting into this thing about toxins in the environment and public health because of pollution and all the chemicals and PFAs and BPAs and microplastics and all that. And it was sort of more of an intellectual conversation. He said, oh my gosh, that's right. I've just had 2 good friends die who were below 40, right? And it was a real like punch of that, these things we talk about, it's actually about real people and real people that people know. And that it was like, this isn't blah blah blah, this is actually people's lives. And then I went, oh, that's why we're here, because these are real people with real lives. And now every time I go with my eyes open and think, wow, what's the story here and how can we help each other? Another big one, since I have time, was I spoke with a farmer who was on the CBC morning host, who does regenerative farming. And he had said he's an arch conservative and regulations are all bad. We had a really great chat afterwards, because regenerative farming is basically organic farming on steroids. You're going to basically make the soil better. So I didn't understand, but we had a great chat afterwards. And it was just, I don't have time now, but it was wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. And Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm actually glad I got to answer second, because, it's hard to think we have so many conversations over the course of a campaign. Some of them are more interesting than others. On Friday that just passed, I was out at the Lost Villages Brewery, and there was a group of guys there who had just done, I believe it was a hockey tournament, or they had just finished a game and they were having some celebratory beers. And one of the guys, I went around and introduced myself to some people, and one of the gentlemen who were there was a farmer. And he said, I'm very pro-liberal and I'm one of very few. And, I'm working to convince my friends, because oftentimes they're really voting against their own self-interest. And so we got into this, great conversation about crop insurance and about supply management and about some of these policies that actually really help support farmers, and even, foreign aid and how that plays into farmers' bottom lines, because oftentimes the contracts that they get come from foreign aid. So I'm actually going to be meeting with that gentleman at noon today, just after this conversation, so that we can get more into that conversation and how come he, as a farmer, supports the Liberal Party, and what policies specifically it is that he feels really support our agricultural community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we are approaching our hour time slot, and so it doesn't appear that we have any more questions. So I will just ask for both of you to give a final closing statement, and we'll start with
Sure.
Sarah.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to you, Mateo, and to you, Maylise, and of course Julia, who's hiding in the background somewhere. I'm always happy to have the pleasure to run into the seeker chicks out in the wild, and it's so nice to have the opportunity to be here chatting with you, and of course with Gordon. And I wish my other 2 colleagues could be here as well as we go through this campaign. This has been an absolutely wild ride, and I knew that it would be. I'm working hard, and I will continue to work hard for this riding and this community, regardless of what capacity that is in. And it's funny. I was reflecting back on the what do you do to unwind? And earlier in the conversation, I was saying I was trying to get out into my front porch to be in the sunshine, but I am so looking forward to getting back into my garden. That is something that at this time of year, especially, goodness gracious, does it ever feel good to get outside and get your hands in the dirt?
Yep.
And so, I love our community. I love this riding, and I will continue to advocate fiercely for it. I will work across party lines. I will be an advocate who is, positive, and direct, and that's what you can get from me. So I hope that everyone on April 28th will vote, or you can go into the Elections Canada office anytime before the advance polls open on Friday, and cast your ballot. So voting is available now. It's been available since the writ dropped, and I encourage everybody to get out there. Whether or not you're voting for me, exercise your right to vote. And if you want to stop by my office, we're at 132nd Street West in Cornwall. Thanks.
Thank you. Gordon.
Thank you.
Basically, the Green Party is a voice for the future, so, and a voice for the future needs to be heard, because if you think about our quality of life and how it's decreased over the time and become much more stressful, much more frenetic, much more, your buying power is going down. Well, unfortunately, you ain't seen nothing yet if we keep doing the same old. And the fact is, the Liberals and the Conservatives have swapped power for 150 plus years. And it's about time somebody else was at the driver's seat. Could be anybody. We're there as that dissenting voice to say, let's make fundamental changes. Now, that means in a rural area like SDG, a focus on agriculture and the small towns and small business. The number one issue I would work on locally that is very, very green is the depletion of our soils and the fact that businesses, farms need to get bigger and bigger and are unaffordable. So what we want is a voice to speak for the long term. That means putting in laws like they are in Quebec, where speculation from large corporations and investment houses cannot buy farmland so the young farmers can buy land. That means working on trade across Canada and putting in supply chain methods so the big stores are putting in the agricultural products from Ontario instead of California. So if you want things to really change, vote green, and then we'll be there and we will make the big guy change. So your vote is not voted when you vote green. And the big thing, of course, what will that eventually do is we will have some form of proportional representation. And then things will get a lot better before not only the crisis we have with Donald Trump, but the climate crisis happens. And we don't want to be caught with our pants down like we've been caught today. We can work and do things ahead of time. So thanks for voting green on April 28th. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. And thank you, Sarah. And thank you both for being with us today. We appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who's watched. And Miley, if you have
I do
anything
have a
else to
quick
say,
question for both
say
of
it
you.
now.
What is your guilty pleasure snack, Sarah?
I eat all the snacks, and I don't feel guilty about any of them.
Good answer. And what about you, Gordon?
It used to be Dutch licorice, okay, but I'm on some heart meds now recently where I'm not allowed to have licorice because of some of the ingredients in licorice, like if it's real licorice. And so my wife has banned me. She's a nurse and she knows better than I am. So I'm at the point in my age where my guilty pleasure is playing with my grandson. And
That's nice.
and that's
No.
what I do right now. So that's what I'm going to do. He was sick the last couple of days, and now he's smiling and happy. So that's my guilty pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for both coming
Thank you.
on and spending the last hour with us. I know you guys are really busy, so thank you again. And there are a couple more debates. There's one coming tomorrow at the North Stormont Place in Avonmore. I don't know if you're both going to be at that
Yeah,
one.
we are.
Perfect. That's at 7:30 tomorrow night. And then on Wednesday, we have the Labour Council candidates debate at the Cornwall Public Library starting at 6 o'clock. So we will see you there.
which the
Yeah,
Seeker
we
will be live
casting
casting, right?
that one. And for anybody who would like to hear all the all the all the candidates talking, I can't even talk today. We do have a banner on our Seeker website called Meet the Candidates, and there is an article about the Your TV. Help me out here, Mateo. There's an article about the debate from Your TV where you can go see the replay
Yep.
about that one too, so you can hear from all the candidates. Thank you again so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
both for being
Well
here.
done. That was great fun.
And good luck on the rest of your busy days.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.